Hello and welcome, it's Neil Dougan here. We're looking at Module 14 and the philosophy. Today we're looking at the chemical basis for cellular functioning. Now that may sound a lot like going back to high school, or perhaps if you studied science at university level, then it had that feeling of, oh my god, we're going to be degenerating or going into this dreadful level of detail. I can assure you we're not going to go into any kind of detail at all on the subject. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the really high level issues that are around the subject. However, from a perspective of being able to live for a very long time and to have a very healthy life, and a life which is very supporting, and being able to allow you to have lots of very good relationships in your life, getting this right, actually getting the chemical basis of the cellular functioning right, is the difference between having an ordinary sort of a life where you degenerate and you suffer all kinds of chronic illnesses, and the road where we're heading, which is the path to immortality, where you have a very, very high functioning system for a very, very long period of time, and it supports you in all kinds of ways. So this is a very, very important, very critical work that we're talking about here, and it's coming at week 14 or module 14, depending on how you're actually approaching this. You may well be seeing this at week 28 or even a longer period of time into the process, but nonetheless this is module 14, so this is the 14th step in a journey, and it's incredibly tied into the work which has gone previous to it as well. So here we go anyway. There are two huge forces at work here in terms of the chemical basis for cellular functioning. The first one you'll be aware of is the DNA. So this is the instruction set for everything that happens within your body. So the DNA tells your cells how to do everything. Absolutely everything is recorded, and the instruction set is sitting there in the DNA. I mentioned that there are two, so we've got one huge one, which is the DNA, and then all of the environmental factors for the decision-making process around that DNA are the other major factor. So when we're talking about the environmental factors here, this could be things that are happening inside the cell, but they're not actually of the DNA process. So we've got the instruction set, or the blueprint, which is sitting there, and then we've got all of these other factors which come in and moderate or interfere with the processes of the DNA. So let's talk about a few of these. Obviously the microbes that are living inside your body are a tremendous input, have a tremendous influence on this. So any viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungus and so on which are living inside the cell will have a tremendous impact on the decision-making process that the DNA replication is going on. So in other words, how the DNA is instructing the manufacturing of all of this basic chemistry within the cell is widely impacted upon by these other organisms that are living inside the cell. Equally, the processes are being impacted by organisms which are living outside of the cell. So we're talking about things which, for example, let's use an example. Let's look at an example of a cell inside our brain. Now, the bacteria that are living in our digestive system, as an example, can influence the processes that have been going on there. So in other words, these DNA processes that are going on inside the brain cell can be impacted upon by a bacteria that's living in the colon. And the processes that it can do that are quite wide-ranging. So there's a whole lot of different ways that a bacteria sitting inside the colon could actually impact on this DNA processes that are going on inside the brain. We don't need to go into what all those details are. It's just enough to know that a bacteria sitting inside of your colon can actually have this impact on the decision-making process that's going on inside the brain. This is absolutely an incredible opportunity for us within this TRIM project, and the actual whole program here is that we can get involved in this communication that's going on between, for example, a bacteria sitting inside your colon and a neuron in the brain. Obviously, things like toxins and chemicals and drugs and all that type of thing, the food that we're eating, all of those type of influences come in and have a dramatic impact on this whole DNA RNA process that's going on within any cell. So any kind of toxicity, whether it be foodborne or stuff that you're breathing in, toxic thoughts, toxic relationships, memories, all of these kinds of things come in and have a real impact on how this enzyme creation process, because that's really what we're talking about here. The DNA makes proteins, and enzymes are a particular case of protein that we're talking about, and they are really, really important in terms of what we're doing here with this particular module. So these enzymes, what they're doing is they're actually hastening or slowing down other chemical processes that are going on in the body, and all of these, what they call epigenetic factors, so these are things outside of the the main aspect of the genetics, are coming in and impacting on these genetic type processes that are going on with the DNA RNA processes. When we talk in tomorrow's video more about the actual science of what's going on here, we'll talk about things like methyl markers and how they come in and interfere with the DNA RNA processes. So we'll go into that a little bit more in tomorrow's video. But for now, what I want to have a look at is the very high level emotional belief systems, memories, or habits, all of these types of things that are going on, how they actually impact on the cellular functioning. So we're talking about the actual chemical basis for cellular functioning, and how these mind level issues are coming in and having a direct impact on the functioning that's going on. So to begin with, let's actually have a look at some of the emotions. So many people have found their way into TRIM at the stage of their lives, as we've been brought up to actually lead these lives. It's not necessary in the remotest for us to actually be following these paths, and of course that's what we're doing with TRIM. We're actually deciding to take a completely different path. But nonetheless, many people who have found their way into TRIM have been struggling with their weight, for example. So there are some very specific emotions which trigger impacts on this chemistry. So the number one is fear. Now, depending on your school of thought, many schools of thought consider that fear is really the only negative emotion, and all other negative emotions actually are grandfathered from it. So depending on your philosophical approach to these things, fear is really quite a dramatically important part of the equation, and fear will 100% of the time come in and interfere with these chemical processes. So if we're talking about weight management at the chemical level of the cellular functioning, there's many different things that could be involved here. One of them would be the actual basic metabolic rate, so in other words how hungry our cells are for activity, so how busy they are, how fast they're actually consuming energy. And one of the things that we know the difference between a younger person and a person in middle age or older age is that the rate at which the cells are functioning dramatically drops. So fear has a big impact on this type of what they call basic metabolic rate or basal metabolic rate. And so this is a marvelous opportunity for us within TRIM, is to actually target into here. Another classic example is decisions around whether the fat will be stored or not. So in other words, this is free-floating energy within the body, whether it be as sugars or fats actually floating around in the body, and the decision to actually turn it into fat is very moderated by fear as well. Equally, the decision around whether the body is going to, say for example, there's an energy shortfall within the blood supply or anywhere within the body, say there's a shortfall, rather than you feeling tired and lethargic and that type of thing, there's an opportunity for the body to actually say, yeah, well, we've got plenty of fat sitting here, let's convert it into readily available energy, whether that be sugar or indeed one of the processes into ATP. Then that decision process is very impacted upon by fear. So other very important negative emotions which have an impact on all of those ranges of cellular functioning. So I've now listed, I think, probably 4 or 5 of them, and that's out of tens of thousands. So we've got tens of thousands of these chemical processes that are going on within the cell, all of them being impacted upon one way or another by fear. But other emotions which equally come in and impact on these things are things like self-pity. Now that might sound like a very harsh, judgmental term, but self-pity is incredibly important as a moderator of cellular activity, this sort of chemical processes that are going on within the cells. If you're feeling like a sad sack, if you're feeling sorry for yourself, then this has a high level impact at the very bottom level functioning of your cell. On the other end of the scale, we have things like anger. So anger tends to stimulate all kinds of functioning, and obviously we're talking here about all of this chemical basis for cellular functioning to be all in balance. So we've got stuff which should be high at some times, should be low at other times. It needs to be the appropriate amount at the appropriate time. And anger is one of these very stimulating emotions. So anger comes in and it overstimulates some of those chemical processes. Were anger to have a brother, then resentment may well be the brother emotion of anger, and resentment is a darker sort of an energy altogether, and it has quite a different cellular, the chemical basis of cellular functioning. It has quite a different, darker effect on the actual processes that are going on inside the cell. Equally distracting to the functioning within the cell are emotions like power. So in our modern way of looking at things here in 2015, generally people talk about, isn't it a marvellous thing to have personal power, to be a powerful person and that type of thing. I'm telling you that having power drive you can have disastrous, absolutely disastrous impacts on the cellular functioning. So people talk about power generating violence, for example. So in other words, when power gets out of control and it's not working in a positive sort of a way within your system, then things like violence will actually be stemmed from it. And sitting alongside of things like violence will be cruelty and vindictiveness, and equally the desire to punish. So let's suspend disbelief for a moment here and actually think about a person who is seeing a news report, for example, of some criminal, and the criminal's been doing some terrible thing to a woman, for example, and swelling up inside yourself may well be at that time a desire for them to be punished. You feel as though this person actually really needs to be punished. Now that need to punish a person, that vindictiveness, is absolutely disastrous in terms of your cellular chemistry as well. So what we're talking about here is a whole range of negative emotions, all of which have a very negative effect on the correct functioning of the cell. So it's imperative, absolutely imperative, that within this whole TRIM program that we begin the process, the journey of getting these negative emotions actually into their right place. So they all have a role. Perhaps something like the need to punish people is pretty unlikely. I can't think of a situation where it's a good idea to punish a person. However, the need for justice and order and those types of things, which are, they're related issues to what we're talking about there with the subject of punishment. All of those things need to be in their right place, and they need to be in their right meter, and they need to have a whole lot of other very positive emotions that go in there and really run the show. So for example, if you're coming from a place of love, well then the need for all these very, very dark negative aspects of these emotions to be controlling is extremely limited. So this is the work that we're doing within TRIM, and by the time you're at the stage here where you're listening to this video or watching this video and it's module 14, you will have had a lot of contact with us on the subject of the types of change that is occurring within your body as a result of the audio work that you're listening to, and obviously the conscious mind changes that you're wanting to make as well. Okay, so what I want to do is just summarize some of the areas within your body that we've been talking about here, and the functioning, the sorts of aspects of your operation that are being impacted upon by these high-level things which come in and impede or impact upon the cellular functioning, the chemical basis of cellular functioning. The first one is metabolism. We talked about that, and it's the rate at which we're actually metabolizing all of the foodstuffs, and it directly relates to the rate at which we want to live life. So if we want to be busy and active and engaged, having lots of play and excitement in our lives, well then we need to have a metabolism which is supporting that. Next one that we talked about was the fat management, and if you're somebody who's having difficulty managing your weight, well then you need to be following these things that we're talking about here, so that your cells make decisions about the management of energy within it in such a way that you no longer have an issue with your weight. So aging is another very important aspect of this, and the disease of aging, as we talk about it nowadays in 2015, people are talking about the idea of the disease of aging. So we used to talk about the diseases that came from aging, so we would talk about things like diabetes or dementia or heart disease or cancer. These types of things were all talked about as being the diseases that came with aging. Now what we're talking about is that aging itself is a disease, and all of the processes around aging are exactly the target of what we're doing here in this module. So we're looking at the chemical basis of cellular functioning and all of the high consciousness impacts that come in and change the rate at which the cells are making decisions around aging. Tied into all of this, we talked about briefly, was the whole business of cell division. So if we have a situation where the cells are actually not wanting to be growing and changing and improving all the time, well then there's very definite consciousnesses which are in there driving that process, and so the whole issues around cell division and cell health and the vitality and vigorousness of all of that cellular activity is very, very impacted upon by what we're talking about here. All these thought level or consciousness level things and how they're impacting on these chemical processes that are going on in the cell. Okay, well look, I hope you found that useful and interesting. Do look out for future webinars which will be on the subject here, and keep commenting in the Facebook group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. So thanks for watching.